Through the thicket was thrust a head of nightmare and lunacy. Grinning jaws bared rows of dripping yellow tusks. Above the yawning mouth wrinkled a saurian-like snout. Huge eyes, like those of a python 1,000 times magnified, stared unwinkingly at the petrified humans clinging to the rock above it. Blood smeared the scaly, flabby lips and dripped from the huge mouth. The head, bigger than that of a crocodile, was further extended on a long, scaled neck on which stood up rows of serrated spikes, and after it, crushing down the briars and saplings, waddled the body of a titan, a gigantic barrel-bodied torso on absurdly short legs. The whitish belly almost raked the ground, while the serrated backbone rose higher than Conan could have reached on tiptoe. A long spiked tail, like that of a gargantuan scorpion, trailed out behind. Welcome to the beginning of our Bestiary of Conan series. Throughout our videos, both on the gods and magic of Conan, we have loosely touched on the Chaos-Comp relationship in mythology, a narrative in many ancient religions where a skyfather or steward of civilization does battle with a chaos serpent or evil dragon figure to decide the fate of mankind. While in the religions of Conan, this is best represented by the rivalry between the divine god Mitra and the demon god Set, on the ground level a much more literal man versus dragon relationship exists. While there are many different kinds of creatures in the Hyborian Age one can refer to as dragons, each with seemingly less information on them than the last, this theory-crafting heavy video has based them down into 5 distinct types. Here we will present a pseudo-scientific theory on their evolutionary process and how all 5 types may be connected. This is Dragons in Conan. Grimdark.
Half off!
What are dragons? Dragons are a loose, bestial family of savage, powerful creatures, best described as a mix between demon, fire elemental, dinosaur, and Old One bloodlines. Each type of dragon leans more or less heavily into one of the 4. Type 1 dragons are called black or magma dragons, and are said to be powerful full demons. These appear as what one classically thinks of when the image of an evil dragon comes to mind. Black scales, 4 legs, giant, fire-breathing, and the only known dragon type to be able to fly, at least in full. The Type 5, as we'll get to, do have flying variations. Type 2 are called basilisk or chitin dragons, and resemble something like a tentacled horror crossed with a quadrupedal dinosaur. This eastern iteration has acidic abilities in addition to a trademark 4 eyes and mouth tentacles. It is important to note here that despite the mouth tentacles, which would appear to be something of an aquatic feature along with the term basilisk, which does invoke a sense of watery dragon, it is important to note that the basilisk does not have webbed toes or fins anywhere on its body, making it still a land beast. Very important for our future theory. Type 3 are effectively normal, big, reptile-looking versions of the Type 2, with a clear relation to their Type 1 partial parent group through being wingless offshoots of the same creature, clearly more mixed with physical creatures despite having demon blood. Depictions of the Type 3 heavily vary from being more dragon-like in appearance to appearing as a carnivorous offshoot of a stegosaurus in many drawings of the creature. The more black dragon-looking Type 3s are usually classified by color, red, which retains the fire breath of Type 1, white, and green, respectively. While the carnivorous stegosaurus offshoot is usually referred to by habitat, with the most common being called a forest dragon. But if we were to mimic the sort of breeding patterns and look of the more draconic-looking ones, we would say perhaps a snow dragon and a perhaps magma dragon are also possible, though it is unknown whether the more carnivorous stegosaurus type would have the fire breath, as it does seem to take more after the Type 5, as we'll get to, parent. Type 4 is easily the most alien in body plan due to countless generations of adaptation to underground living, which are the serpent-like worm, known to hypnotize their prey before devouring them. We can see a clear relation to the Type 3 through the horns and teeth part of the body plan, as well as scales. This means it clearly, as an entity, is within the more reptilian dragon family, rather than being descendant from insects of some type. Lastly, there are the Type 5, which are the only members of the dragon family with no supernatural elements to them whatsoever. That is because the last member of this family is easily the most diverse, that being the all-living, necromantically revived or fully resurrected groups of dinosaurs. Whether it be the Tyrannosaurus rex, pterodactyl, triceratops, or previously mentioned stegosaurus, all dinosaurs appearing in Conan are ritualistically referred to as dragons, both by the narrator of the story and by characters in it. This means that while some Type 5s can fly, as you will see in our future theory, not all of them have a place in this particular theory of dragon evolution. Now that we've explained the 5 different types of dragons, let's go through a timeline of events to see how they're all connected. As we continue, remember that this is only a theory that I've said a million times, and your thoughts on the matter are always welcomed and appreciated in the comments below. The purpose of this video is to get the community thinking about this subject, not to tell you what to think. With all that said, I should have a clearly labeled source list below. The only reason this video is including a theory is that, well, if it was just dragons in Conan, there's the video. From Hell to Katai, or March of the Dragons. Our story begins an unknown many years after the time of Elder Night, when the beings who walked the earth, who would later become demon gods and greater demons, were banished to the various hell realms known as the Outer Dark. These intelligent, powerful beings would deal with the trauma of their genocide in different ways, but chief among them was Set, also called Yig, the father of serpents. Far from a tragic figure, even before the trauma of banishment, Set was known for his love of manipulation, destruction, forced sexual intercourse producing new unholy abominations, and now a true unyielding hatred for humanity, the new inheritors of the earth. In line with the occult science of demonology that dictates a hierarchy of savage low demons mixed with intelligent powerful ones, which Howard's work takes reference from, and Jebel Sog, another demon god, having children with a fire elemental as talked about in the story Beyond the Black River, it can be assumed that a similar instance occurred here between Set and a lesser fire elemental of some type. I'm usually thinking and depicting in my head when I'm thinking of this a classical fire-based hellhound. It would explain the fire breath when mixed with the demon blood of Set, at least in the loose canonical logic of demon-on-demon mating. This monstrous union would produce a small race of strong but still savage fire-breathing demons known as the Black Dragons, or Type 1. It is implied heavily that black dragons are related to Set, as despite their very English depiction in both comics and games, they are continuously referred to as serpent-like, when even if one is using the classical division of big cat, bird of prey, and snake that go into the dragon, clearly more cat-like features were emphasized. The only reason to imply flying serpent in this context would be to connect the creatures to the father of serpents. Further evidence that these beings are indeed demons comes to us during the time of King Conan, where those rare cults that summon the great winged beasts did so through the same portals that one can see demonologists of the setting also use to conjure forth their bound servants. A named black dragon, referred to as the demon itself, would be Vistrix. He would become a rite of passage to best in combat to join the elite Aquilonian fighting force under King Conan of the same name, the Black Dragons. During his time physically manifested on Earth, Vistrix's diet would consist primarily of young mammoth migrating to feed from hunting grounds in the north to nesting in the south of western Hyboria for centuries. One such demon would appear over 65 million years ago in the age of beings also referred to as dragons later in history. These would be the highly varied Type 5, known to us as dinosaurs. Among these, it is best assumed that a deeply unfortunate stegosaurus caught the eye of a lustful fiery son of Set. Their offspring would become the cornerstone of dragon evolution, from which both basilisks and worms know as their parent group. These would be the highly adaptable and straightforward Type 3 dragons, simply called dragons. Their half-reptile, one-fourth demon, and one-fourth elemental bloodline would make them incredible creatures of adaptation, spawning several subgroups. Red dragons, who adapted to the desert, green dragons, who adapted to the jungle, white dragons, who adapted to the frigid northern snow-covered tundra, and forest dragons, resembling their dinosaur parent, most readily, of course, existing in the forest. Like many Type 5s, the forest dragon would survive well into the Hyborian Age due to what were networks of underground ecosystems untraveled by man. However, the same cannot be said of the red, green, and white dragons. Sadly for this branch of the dragon family, the new races of man and other sentient life would not allow these beasts to continue ravaging their homes. Eventually, these 3 subtypes would be hunted to total extinction. After an unknown amount of time, the alien-like Giant King race would enter the scene. using advanced scientific sorcery to fully revive the dead creatures to be used as guardians and pets. This revival reintroduced the half-demon beasts into the Hyborian ecosystem and plays an important role in us understanding their nature. Despite being classified as demons, dropping demon blood and worms having essence of Set as one of their possible loot drops in Conan Exiles, it is obvious that these beasts take more after animals than demons. This new breed of Type 3s are not the same as those of the past, who would evolve and change into demon beasts of a true misanthropic legacy, but perhaps due to what seems to be a more material process of full resurrection, have now a more animal than truly violent nature. Before the extinction of Type 3s, similarities between the horn and teeth patterns would suggest that the extreme adaptability from demon blood present in the species was pushed to its limits, as some were forced to adapt to underground living. And this would be a way to avoid hunters, either animalistic in nature, it's very scary to think of a possible predator that could prey on Type 3 dragons, or a way to avoid, of course, human hunters, which was most likely said predator. This process would force the reemergence of higher demon qualities from Set's bloodline, such as hypnotism out of a sheer need to survive, as well as an increased sense of touch, removing much of the other senses, including eyes. Limbs were slowly decreased in size until eventually they were no longer needed. This long evolutionary process had millions of years to take place, which would turn them into the Type 4s, or worms. Primarily, the two environments they would adapt to would be the first breed, or subtype, of white dragons that would eventually become the ice worms, and the second breed, red dragons, which would eventually become magma worms. Both are featured in Age of Conan and Conan Exiles, respectively. The reptilian bodies, horns, and mouth plan are all that remains, marking them as the most unique members of the dragon family. Finally, we go to the east, to Kitai, home to the Type 2 dragon, known as a basilisk. Its body plan obviously marking it as an offshoot of the Type 3 dragons. Its physical appearance can first create a harsh mystery. It's obvious to anyone that a great old one of some type certainly had a role to play in the making of such a beast. Its mouth tentacles, multiple eyes, and acidic abilities, while interesting, are not the key feature to look at. It's more about what this creature doesn't have, that being the absence of webbed feet, fins, or a tail made for balance under the ocean. Most great old ones are associated with the water or have a series of heavily aquatic features associated with them. We have now ruled out the majority of the list simply due to the fact that the basilisk is still a land-based demon beast. We now have to ask the question which eldritch horror family of old ones is associated with tentacles despite not being aquatic, has multiple eyes, and is associated with acid-like attacks. The answer is closer to home than many Conan Exiles fans may realize. Let's take a simple comparing look at the Avatar of Yog and the Basilisk of Age of Conan, both published by the same company, which used similar assets in both games. This shows us that these similarities as we explore them are meaningful rather than circumstantial. As one can see, the eldritch horror children of Yog and the basilisk not only have the exact same type of eyes, differences in which can be explained by the Type 3 dragon side of the basilisk's bloodline, but also have 10 tentacles total on their bodies. The clustering of tentacles around the mouth for the basilisk is even foreshadowed in the body plan of the eldritch horror, as we can see tentacles between its upper and lower jaws. You will also notice a distinct gap of front teeth present in both creatures' upper and lower teeth, not present in any other member of the dragon family. So the tooth plan is partially influenced from the eldritch horror, but in addition to that, the clustering of tentacles around the mouth makes sense because the body needs room for the 4 legs of a largely quadrupedal group like the Type 3 dragons. While the body plan similarities are many, as the basilisk truly does look like what it is, and most likely is, a demon beast crossbred with a cannibalistic savage spawn of Yog-Sothoth, what I believe truly cements my case is the relation of abilities. A key defining feature of the basilisk is its acidic rather than fiery breath, which is also the main form of attack used by the Avatar of Yog. In the case of the horror, this takes the form of acidic ink sprayed in extreme volume beneath it, much like the acid attack of the basilisk, doing damage over time rather than all at once. Much like Set, Yog-Sothoth would be known to get around in history, having children with just about everything. Now that you know what dragons are and where they come from, Let's talk about them in modern times, 10,000 BC. Dragons today, or Here There Be Dragons. Type 1 dragons, as implied in our Magic and Conan video, can only be summoned by master demonologists. There is no guarantee that the demonologist or respective cult will be able to control the demon beast, but to summon one is to have already been highly accomplished in your field. What use does a person have for a dragon when they already possess a demon army? It is perhaps just as much due to requirement of skill as assured danger that these creatures are so rarely summoned. Type 2 dragons are native to eastern Hyboria in Kitai. Type 3 dragons are seemingly the only ones that, while rare still across the lands of Turan and Hyperborea since their revival, can indeed be trained and domesticated as demonstrated by the Giant Kings. It is possible that at this time they have already spread and diversified across the entire map. Type 4s are incredibly resilient and can be found in any environment of extreme heat or cold, respectively, depending on subtype, but also simply in the earth. So desert worms obviously exist as well. So if you want a dune worm in Conan, here's how you get it. This often results in magma worms living across the Middle East and ice worms being creatures of far north caves. Lastly, Type 5s, depending on the, again, extremely diverse subgroups, can usually be found in swamps and forest-like biomes, which seem like the preferred environments of these prehistoric animals.